Hi, this is Nancy.
You are absolutely out of control.
I figured it was you, the no caller ID.
You have got to gain control of yourself, young lady.
How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good. Actually, just got back from the hospital. They did a healthcare roundtable meeting, and so we're in discussion about also providing behavioral health transport services for them. So. Just trying to get everything going with them and getting ready to reach out to other organizations.
So who all was in that behavior or meeting you just had where you were talking about the behavioral?
So it was a roundtable meeting. So it's basically the hospital discussing into an open group, what the needs are, expanding into behavioral health. So there was other mental health organizations there, police department, county, the hospital, the city, representatives, kind of like a lot of people there. So
did you get up and talk?
I did not get up. I did ask a question about transportation, and then they talked to the CEO and the director of behavioral health and a couple other people after the meeting. So looking at working together to figure out a plan.
So what are they expecting of you for the behavioral health transportation side of the house?
So they're hoping to figure out. Basically, what they've been using so far is the ambulance to transport patients who've come into the hospital, but they need to go on to other facilities for further treatment. So they're looking to us to provide a different level of transportation because they don't all need ambulances.
Exactly.
Actually, probably most of them don't need ambulances. So
who's been paying for that transportation?
Either the hospital or the county.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So at that roundtable meeting, was the representative from the county? Were they there in participation?
They were just a listener, so they weren't. It was the hospital who was directing the meeting.
So that is definitely a point of entry for you of really focusing on that price point. Because we obviously know that not everyone needs to go by ALS or BLS. So why are we paying those high premiums when you don't need to?
Right.
They need to be paying you, NEMT provider. So that's a big point of entry for you. But also, like even you mentioned those rates. I'm looking through your contract right now. I just scrolled through it. I went through it, read through it once. But those rates are absolute garbage.
Oh yeah, those are, like I said, those are a couple years old. We were just trying to get our foot in the door. I can send you our updated rate sheet, and I'd be interested to get your feedback. But we're also trying. If it's a private pay person, we're also not trying to gouge them either. It's important to me to be accessible, but obviously get paid what we're worth.
100%.
So I'll forward you our current price sheet and see what you think.
So you get your contract in front of you?
Yeah.
So who else have they given this contract to? I know this contract has your name on it, but who else are they peddling this to?
I don't know. I mean, obviously it seems like this contract with probably their generic one they gave to
Right.
So I'm assuming that this is probably what they.
Right.
But obviously we need to change that because we don't do ALS or BLS.
Exactly.
So, but again, I'm reaching out to you because this is a pretty lengthy agreement.
Well, this is like 22 pages, which honestly for a hospital, I would say the norm that I see for hospital contracts are typically 20 to 25 pages. So, I mean, when I saw this, because I saw in your email, you told me how you're concerned that this is a pretty lengthy contract, but honestly, for a hospital contract, this kind of I would say is the norm. Anywhere from 20 to 25 pages, so it falls in there. But, let me ask you this. Who how are you negotiating this with them? Is it always these roundtable discussions? Is it over the phone? Because like I told you at the roundtable gathering, I'm all about documentation, documentation, documentation. So it would be my hope that as much of this as possible would be negotiated through email.
Well, actually, a lot of it has been meetings with the ER director, with the director of care coordination.
Are you already providing services in and out of the hospital?
Yeah, we're already providing services.
And who's paying for it?
The hospital mostly.
And are you billing them once a month?
Yeah.
And the rates that are featured in this generic contract that they sent you, are your rates higher than what they featured?
Yeah, we have different rates now. We're billing them with our current rates.
And you bill them once a month?
Yeah.
Are they prompt payers?
Yeah, they're pretty good payers.
Okay. Again, I only read through this one time. So real quick, let me give you some quick thoughts here. I won't tie you up too long, but let me give you some initial thoughts on what I think.
Because I think one of my problems is that we're not exclusive. There's another competitor in town who I don't know what they have with them. But, if we're going to be offering and expanding our behavioral health transports pretty much just for them.
100. Look, if you're going to be doing something that is exclusive, then you get first rights to refusal. That's exclusive. That exclusivity carries a price. So there's no question. That's why I asked you what is the mode, what is the method of negotiation? Is it always verbal meetings? Because again, I want the documentation. It's great. There's you got to do the 1-2 punch, have telephone conversations, have the physical meetings, but a lot of the details need to be hammered out in writing, via email, direct correspondence, things like that. But if you are literally in the process of doing something that's custom for the hospital, that needs to be reciprocated. I know a lot of people when we're dealing with the hospitals, or even how I feel about the brokers. A lot of people, they get all excited and giddy and crazy because this is their first opportunity at a great deal, this and that. But that doesn't mean you're a pushover.
Right.
So some of the best deals are the deals that don't happen. Now, hopefully this will come to fruition for you, but if it doesn't, the world's not going to end. You're still in a great spot, and you're still going to continue to grow, even in different directions. But if you are tailoring your daily operation around what they need, that's great, but that needs to be compensated, and I don't want to say guaranteed through trip volume, but you need to have like the first rights to refusal.
Right.
So those things need to be discussed. And those are the type of things that, they're great to be discussed over the phone, but something that is a critical point of negotiation like that needs to be in writing.
Yeah. Well, we haven't had any negotiation type conversations. It's always been what are your needs? What can we provide? Kind of a general, let's come to the table and see what's going on.
So what I would do, I would make this like this isn't going to be a one-time negotiation, that's it, everything's agreed to. This is going to be a protracted negotiation where you're already doing the physical confrontations, the round tables, the telephone conversations. Now, I think is a great point in time. Just on what you're telling me right now and what I'm reading in this contract, now is a great point in time to start the email correspondence with John Doe or whoever that point of contact is, and start dropping a couple of dimes of the direction you're headed in, which would include the discussions of more exclusivity. Because again, those things need to be addressed. If you're going to be tailoring your operation, which means you're going to be, if you're not going to do a mass expansion, even if you are going to do a mass expansion just to cater to this, but bottom line is if you're going to change your daily operation to cater to these needs, they got to be reciprocated, or else you can't you can't neglect anyone else. Now it'd be one thing if you're adding more vehicles, but even then, if you're adding more vehicles, incurring more overhead expenses, there's got to be some type of guaranteed reciprocation in here. For which case, if you read this contract, there's none of that.
Right.
So let me run through this real quick so you can make a couple of quick notes, and then I'll kind of circle back to what we're talking about because you'll see how some of those things will tie in.
Okay.
All right, so The very first thing is towards the beginning there where it talks about that Exhibit A, and I know we just touched upon it a minute ago. I want to make sure that ALS and BLS stipulations are removed.
Right.
Those 100% got to be removed, because the reason I say that, and if they wanted to keep them in there, it's one of those things that if you agreed to it, even though you can't provide that type of service, I know it's a generic contract. I had an issue a couple years back where there was a lawsuit, not with the hospital, it was with a different organization. But they left stipulations in there that didn't apply to them, and everybody knew it didn't apply to them going into it.
Right.
And when the agreement went south and they had to go to arbitration, the other party was attempting to point to those type of stipulations that were in the contract that weren't applicable to them, but they agreed to it. They kind of used that as motivation to throw the whole thing out, that there was a flawed agreement, never should have been agreed to. So we want to make sure we dot every I, cross every T. We don't leave any loose ends open for them to ever argue any type of points. Like for example, for them to ever say, well, that was in there, and she's arguing that in the future she was going to do it. Here she is. She's working to cater her business to do behavioral health transports. She also promised us verbally or whatever that she was going to eventually do ALS, BLS. No, you're not. So any references to those need to be taken out. But understand the true purpose and motivation, so that in your thinking, when you read through this, when the Joel Davis isn't there, you could always be thinking, I don't want any exposure to anything that can come back, and any skeletons in the closet that can come back 2-3 years down the road that they could use as evidence. As like a hook to hook you into something that you never agreed to.
Right.
Go to what is it? 1.2.2.
Okay.
Personnel shall have a health examination according to the city, county, EMS requirements, blah, blah, blah. The whole reason I noted that, same thing, EMS stuff. All that needs to be reworked.
Okay.
Do not put yourself in a position where you're agreeing to any type of credentialing, certification that is not applicable to you. So that paragraph right there ties into what I just told you about the ALS, BLS stipulations. All that stuff has to be taken out.
Okay.
2.1, compensation for service. In exchange for the provision of the services, hospital shall pay provider in accordance with the fee schedule attached to Exhibit B incorporated. I just noted that out because the rates obviously are terrible, and I know you already told me that they were already reworked and they're greater. Also, the reason why I put that in there is because they just have their rates are just one rate. What I would suggest you do is, again, this is to kind of tie into what we talked about a few minutes ago, is you don't mention it right now, but as you start this conversation through email, start telling them the needs that you have, start thinking about offering them a tiered system.
Okay.
As in, the tiered system is if we are the if we have, I don't want to say exclusivity. I wouldn't even lock them into exclusivity, but you can use terminology like if you were given the first rights to refusal, if you were the premier provider, if you're the first provider. The rates are, and I'm just making up numbers here. The rates are $30. If you are the second choice, then the rates are $40. If you're the third selection, then the rates are $50. Or they could be the benchmarks could be based off of volume, as in if the trip volume exceeds, and I'm just making up stuff, 100 trips in a month, then it's X number of dollars per trip. If it exceeds 120, then it goes to this.
Right. I did propose that to them 2 years ago when we first came to the table, but it just never, I guess, got to the people who were making the decisions. But I did propose some sort of like tiered system to where, if we have the volume, we can provide it at a discounted rate, or this 10 to 20 is so and so. So I can update that because I liked that system because we want to encourage the volume.
And now when you said like 20, were you doing 20 trips a month, 20 trips a week? What were your numbers?
We were just talking on I want to say weekly basis.
Good.
So like
Good.
the billing is monthly, then the tier was weekly.
Good. Yeah, my point with that too is don't ever shortchange yourself. I see some people going into agreements, and when I tell them let's go with a tiered system, they'll say, okay, if you give us 5 trips in a week, and I'm like, 5? I mean, you should get in 5 a day. I mean, what's this 5 a week? I mean, don't obviously you'd have to do a cost analysis and run the numbers, but you want to make it that realistically they see the advantage of, okay, realistically, and I'm making up numbers. Let's say they had 100 trips in a month. Well, if they saw that there is definitely added benefit to steering as many trips as possible to you versus going to the competitor or the second choice, if you will. I mean, you want to clearly steer them that there is a higher threshold versus like 5. I'd rather have 100 than 5.
Right.
5 would be no big deal, but 100, okay, you know what? If we really want to hit that price point, and we want to save that money, let's make sure we do that. And then again, you compound these, and you may have to have 2-tiered system, as in like, here's our pay structure for our general discharges, private pay, hospital pay, whatever, and then here's the whole new pay structure for the behavioral health transport, because that's a whole different animal.
Which I did put together something like that. I have a rate system for behavioral health.
Beautiful.
And our general rate system.
Good. So the next one, this is a big one for me.
Okay.
3.2.9.
Okay. Gotcha.
Upon the sale, transfer, or disposition of all the substantiality, all the assets, blah, 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 blah. That needs to be either reworked or eradicated, because it's basically saying through merger, consolidation, or reorganization of the provider, that basically this can be rendered null and void. We don't want that. We want to make sure that if you sell this business, this is first of all, we want to negotiate a great contract. Well, if we negotiate a great contract, the last thing we want is when you want to cash out and sell this business, there's a risk that this contract is null and void. We want to make sure that this passes through, and it's going to sustain itself through any acquisition, merger, whatever. So that right there is one of the biggest sticking points for Joel Davis, because if I was working with you or advising you on any type of selling the business, buying the business, this contract, we want to make sure that this contract holds much better weight and water versus like some piddly little Medicaid broker agreement or nonsense like that. This will be legit.
Okay.
That is a critical point right there.
Got it.
Capiche?
Yep.
Cool. Let me see what else I got here. Got to take care of that. Okay. Yeah, those are my biggest things that I had written down from going through the first one. But let me see here what else I got. Yeah, I'd be very careful of how you word the exclusivity.
Okay.
We want to steer them, lead them down the path of exclusivity, but let them think like it's their choice. And the reason the way we steer them down there is to have that tiered system, to have that benefit system. Obviously, we got to make enough money for sure. That's not even up for debate. But I would be very weary of using the word exclusivity. But I would never have a problem going with the first rights to refusal. That's because that doesn't mean that the reason why a lot of these hospitals will be very weary about going into contracts and agreements is realistically they don't want someone holding them captive, holding them hostage. Whereas if you're legitimately saying first rights to refusal, hey, that means we could have a second and a third player. That's not a problem.
Right.
So.
That makes sense.
So, and you also put in here that you're going to be expanding your hours. What type of expansion are you looking for?
Well, because currently we're just Monday through Friday doctor's hours, that's typically our busiest time. So we're looking to expand the weekends and, on call until midnight.
Beautiful.
Because they said, they need that. So
beautiful. Beautiful. That's dude. Look, man. Once you go into after 5 o'clock, you go into the weekends, man. That's that's prime time hours. I mean, you gotta make sure you get enough money to make it worth your while. So that's where you gotta fight for your numbers for sure. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'd be curious what you think of our numbers. So I'll send those over to you. But I did pull those from, I called around to other not local providers, because our local provider or the other competition does this weird hourly system. And I guess that's where I got my initial.
Yeah. What's the situation with the hourly? Who proposed that? You or them?
No, that was me, based on trying to compete with the other provider who does it on an hourly system. But then I did some more research, and I'm like, and then for us, it just didn't work. It doesn't factor in the mileage or anything else, and no one else does it that way. So I converted back to the pickup plus mileage.
100%. That hourly stuff, you know what? That hourly stuff is awesome if we were dealing with some type of home care stuff, but guess what? We're not. So you got to keep it straightforward, base pickup fees, based on time, mileage, mode of transportation, number of drivers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You guys stay out of that hourly stuff. That's a loser for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I'll send over my rates currently, and I talked to another provider in regards. He says he's charging gurney rates, but I brought it down to hopefully be more competitive and entice them to use it more often. So I'd be curious to get your opinion on this, if I should stay at that lower competitive price.
Yeah, the way I do stuff, let me give you an example. And some of the and we kind of use that as a tweener, same type of thing of what you would do with the look, if you're going to be charging gurney rates, then why aren't you just using a gurney?
Right.
It's the same, I get it. Those type of, but let's not call it what it's not. So you either have a wheelchair, you either got your, or you got a stretcher / gurney. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So
okay. That's where my thinking was. And then if I have to use 2 people, then you gotta charge for the second person. Yeah.
That's why that hour mentality, that hourly structure does not work. I've seen other people do that, and honestly, it sounds good on paper. It sounds like you can make it a win-win, but there's always circumstances. You get held up on a trip, and you end up losing. There's no over a long period of time. The hourly structure, you lose, and we're not in this to lose for sure.
Right. Yeah.
So that's it, sissy.
All right. Cool. I'm gonna send over a rate sheet and let me know what you think. But right. I'll get working on this. I'm gonna update the provider responsibility.
When are they looking to make all this? How soon are they looking to do all this? When are they looking to sign a contract? How in depth is this, and where is it? Where are you going to go through?
They definitely want to try to, get this finalized before the end of the year. They said this morning.
Yeah.
So.
Do you understand what I'm talking about in terms of not just the tiered structure in terms of reimbursement, but also tiered as in we're going to have our general discharges, whether the hospital's paying or private pay, but then we got a whole different tier structure for behavioral health transports.
Yeah, and that's what I have already. I already have a whole different rate system for behavioral health, and then I have our standard rates for our breakdown for gurney, Broda, wheelchair, all that.
The other thing that's important is that as you, let's say you get this contract and you do these different rates, different tiered structures, understand that as you do that, you're going to have to make sure whoever's doing your accounting and your policies and procedures and your in-house stuff, they need to be on point. So you personally got to make sure you're involved in outlining the systems, policies, and procedures to make sure that everything is billed correctly so you collect the right amount.
Yeah. No, I do. I do I currently am in everything. So I'm writing the policies, I'm writing the procedures, I'm overseeing the accounting. Even though I'm a business manager, I'm still there every day.
Oh, good. Good.
But I did wonder, do you know of anybody else who's doing some sort of behavioral health? I put together my own like policies and kind of rate system, but I don't know of anybody else.
I know of someone in Florida. I mean, I know over the years my paths have crossed with a few people. A lot of people stay away from it because it can really bog you down time-wise.
Yeah.
And it's definitely more involved, which means it's going to require more personnel. It can slow you down. And as you know, I'm all about efficiency, expediting. Obviously, we want to be safe and everything. But I'm all about developing the most streamlined business model possible. So,
right.
My only, again, and I make no bones about it. I'm not trying to hide it from you. I got no problem with you going after the behavioral health transports. But if this is why in your contract, you always got to have back doors. So if it's going south and it's not working well, if it's killing your operation, you got to bail from it. You got to bail. I mean.
Well, how do I put that in? What kind of?
Well, first and foremost, like even this contract, it had. We want to make sure that if we can cancel behavioral health transport, but that doesn't negate the rest of the contract. So we want to articulate clearly. We have two. We want to articulate clearly. We have two types of services: general discharge transports, behavioral health transports. So we have two different types of services that need to be accounted for in the same contract. We need to be able to, if things go south with behavioral health, we need to be able to back out of that, give written notice, and it doesn't negate the general transports and discharge. It still keeps you in good standing, still gives you first rights to refusal, all that stuff.
Okay, I see.
So you always want to have back doors in there, a way to terminate it. So we want to have a way to terminate the agreement without terminating the entire agreement, terminating, let's say, just behavioral health if we wanted to, without terminating the rest. We want to have something, we want to make sure we articulate some type of semi-annual review or quarterly review. So if you propose these numbers, and let's say your numbers are working great for general discharges, and you realize, you know what, this time, the extra time, effort, manpower required to comply with this behavioral health, we'll keep doing it for you, but guess what? I know we're only 6 months into this agreement, but this needs to be reworked because we're not making margin on it.
Right.
So you want to make sure you include that. This is why I'm always stressing things in writing through email and stuff like that, so that even something like that, like let's say let's say this point of contact you're dealing with is John Doe. So you could tell John, here's what we're thinking. Here are some of our stipulations, even though it's not in a contract. And that is a huge cover your butt strategy and tactic.
Gotcha. I see. Yeah, for sure. I see that.
So you want something in the contract, especially if this didn't have the behavioral health, I wouldn't be as concerned about it. But because of the behavioral health, how it has the potential to bog you down and can become cumbersome and costly and kind of be adverse to your daily logistics. A, you better be getting great compensation. B, capiche?
Got it.
What else you got? How's your hubby? Did he retire yet?
No.
How about
every
your?
time I tell him about all these exciting things, he's like, "Get that money. I'm ready to retire."
You're still gonna retire next year, though, right?
Maybe. I mean, it's all dependent on the business.
Yeah.
If I can grow the business big enough to compensate for his paycheck, then he'd love nothing else.
Beautiful.
And right now, I'm getting so busy. I'm like, gosh, I need more help at home.
Sure.
just so he can be Mr. Mom.
What about your 3 little kitties? How they doing?
They're doing good. My oldest just had a performance at school on Wednesday, so she was excited about that. But the littles are doing good. They're doing good.
What about your mommy? You still in trouble with your mommy?
In trouble?
Yeah.
No, I'm like...
Your mommy told you to avoid me because I'm a bad influence.
No, she's the one who told me to reach out to you.
I know, I'm kidding. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no,
that's
she's
awesome.
like, super excited. And she's actually come on board with me again.
Really?
To help me keep up with the whole billing, because I was pretty much doing it myself, and, I'm just too busy.
Beautiful.
Working on contracts and everything.
Beautiful.
So
that billing is going to be key because, like I say, if you have Jane Doe working for you and she bills, your behavioral health transport as a general discharge, I mean,
right.
You have a couple of those mistakes, those numbers will add up.
Oh, so, yeah, definitely.
So details.
Yeah, just getting my dispatch staff up to date with the, different quotes and everything. So.
Good.
But yeah, I'll send over my rate sheets. Curious what you think.
All right, sister.
I think they're pretty good. But again, with all this growth, I don't know if those numbers are realistic or if they need to be higher or we'll see.
All right, sounds good. I'll be gone. I'm gonna leave here in a little bit, and I'll be back on Sunday, so I'll check them out probably either Sunday night or probably on Monday. I'll check them out.
Yeah, no worries. How are you and the family?
Awesome.
How are things going?
Absolutely awesome. We got a surprise birthday party for my wife tomorrow. It's her birthday. She has no idea. Oh, she totally thinks that I forgot about it and I don't know what I'm doing. I totally, the whole week I just played stupid and asked so how does this cake thing work? Like, where do I get, how do I do this? And you can tell she's getting frustrated, but I already have everything ordered, put together, all these people come and all that stuff, so.
Oh, good job.
Hey, man, the fat man has some skill. Good. All
right, Joel, thanks again for calling.
All right, sister, be good. Have a good one.
Talk soon. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.